Axel here in the Intentional Leadership Podcast Kitchen. Ready for your daily dose of empowerment? I am beyond excited and humbled to be able to explore the intentional leadership journey of a fellow podcaster in the leadership sphere. Don MacPherson has spent 25 years researching employees, customer experiences, attributes of great leaders, and how healthy organizational cultures create and sustain are created. Okay. Back to the beginning. Take two. Axel here in the Intentional Leadership Podcast Kitchen. Ready for your daily dose of empowerment? I am beyond excited and humbled to be able to explore the intentional leadership journey of a fellow podcaster in the leadership sphere. Don MacPherson has spent 25 years researching employees, customer experiences, attributes of great leadership, and how healthy organizational cultures are created and sustained. Don currently is the founder, CEO, and host of 12 Geniuses, where he interviews geniuses from around the world about the trends shaping the way we live and work. His intentional work inspires and empowers all leaders by unpacking the minds of 12 geniuses every year. Welcome, Don, to the Intentional Leadership Podcast platform, where we unpack the journeys of intentional leaders who own their purpose. Welcome, Don, to my neck of the woods.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
I am so excited. So, Don, to kick us off, please share with us some highlights of your intentional leadership journey.
It's certainly evolved from the start of my leadership to where I am today. And I would say that when I got into business, I was really me focused. I wanted to earn a lot of money. I grew up reasonably poor in northern Minnesota in a mining community, and I wanted safety and security that money can provide. And it's interesting because you hear all of these studies about pay and about wealth, and greater pay doesn't give you more happiness. And that was true. Like once I got to a certain point, that was enough money. And so then I started to kind of change and evolve into more we focused as opposed to me focused. And a few things happened very early in my career. One is I started to volunteer. So I volunteered at this Hennepin County Juvenile Detention Center. This is the place where in our county, young offenders, and in the case where the kids were I was working with, they were violent offenders typically. They were housed until they went to an adult prison, so until their 18th birthday. So I started to volunteer there, and I loved it. I really loved working with these kids and seeing that they, even though the next 5 to 10 to 15 years of their lives were mapped out, their hope, their dreams, and connecting with them. And so I knew that I wanted to do that sort of work throughout my life. So that was key for me. And then in 1994, I sold all my possessions. This is about 2 years after I had been working in corporate America, sold all my possessions and moved to Germany with a one-way ticket. And was there that I wanted to explore my limits. What can I do? Not knowing German, not knowing very many people there. What can I make of myself? And I ended up playing basketball there for a year, and then I moved back. And I really understood that I have a high tolerance for risk. I can deal with ambiguity and uncertainty. And so that was a huge confidence builder for me. And then shortly after that, I started a company called Modern Survey and ran that for 17 years. And that's where I really enjoyed working with people, helping them develop, helping them reach their potential. And that's where I am today. Now I feel a great responsibility for the people I mentor and lead. And that's what really drives me.
You mentioned a shift between I to we focus. That seems very profound to me. Dive a little bit more there, Don. What did that mean? What did that take from you to move from this focus of the money, of climbing the corporate ladder, of providing not only for yourself, but those that you love and your family and the things, to selling it all and going on this one way. I mean, that's a very profound shift. Tell me more.
I would love to say that there was intention with that, but it was a matter of experience. I realized that when I was giving of my time, there was greater fulfillment
Wow.
than when I was being paid for the work that I was doing. And so I kind of felt this shift and wanted to lean more into volunteering and helping these young people develop and that sort of thing. But I also needed to pay my bills. And so but I realized as I went from, X to 2X in terms of salary, that there really wasn't that big difference in terms of happiness or lifestyle. Those things were not as deep or profound as some of the other things that I was doing. And so I just noticed that and realized that, I will be better served helping others help themselves or grow into who they can be than I am just serving myself. There's not a lot of fulfillment in that. And I realized that pretty quickly.
You learned early on that happiness doesn't come through the paycheck. It comes through true happiness, true fulfillment. I was just, what came to mind is you shared a profound life-changing experience on your bonus track, September 10th, 2022, a return to faith and loss of hope. That process of losing that hope and faith and regaining it seems like something pretty profound. How did that layer into your travels to Germany and your servant, the charitable work that you did and finding your purpose with your company? How did that fit into this journey of yours?
Well, the episode you're talking about is really chronicling what happened to me personally on 9/11. And I didn't lose anybody in the towers, but I had spent a lot of time in Lower Manhattan in the 1990s. I would stay in a hotel that was in one of the towers, and I had a connection with it. But it was really just this understanding of evil, and I couldn't wrap my head around, to be honest with you. And so I say to this day, that was the worst day of my life, is just losing some innocence. And even though I was in my early 30s, I'd been an adult for quite a while, I just lost some faith and hope in humanity on that day. And in fact, I met up with a friend in the afternoon after we'd watched the towers fall, and we were in a restaurant, and we were just commiserating and trying to make sense of this day and what had happened. And I remember sitting in this booth and just feeling all of my faith and understanding of a higher power leaving my body, and I could feel it dripping out of my fingertips. And that's how physical it was. And I was despondent for months, and not hopeless, but hope had really been threatened, and a lot of hope had been lost. And so, I still had to go on with my life, as we all did, and we were all trying to make sense of that. And so I realized that slowly but surely, my faith and my hope was coming back to me. And a very interesting period of my life was 2018. I was a father to one daughter, and in June of 2018, my second daughter was born. And right around that time, all hate left my body. It was a slower process than when I was in the booth on 9/11, but hate left my body physically. And now, the things that would trigger me or get me upset no longer did. I just wanted to understand them. And I would lean into these things like a political division and really try to understand why somebody might have a different opinion than I would, and not try to change their mind, but really try to empathize with them and understand them. And try to make myself a better human as a result of that. And so that's what that story is about. And it was a long time. That's a long time, 15 years, 16, 17 years to go through that process. But I am a different human being from that day when hate left my body. And I'm just a better person. And it could be like on that day, I knew that my family was complete because we weren't going to have any more children. And so that was a really important awakening for me as well.
I talk a lot about in the Intentional Leadership Program about triggers exist within us. They're not actually the event. They're not outside of us. They're not other people. They're not other things. That the trigger, when we feel that sense of loss of hope, victimization, the shame, the guilt, the fear, all of those are triggers within ourselves. And that the journey of healing that sets us free. It empowers us to, not only from what you just shared as a real life example of that, is this journey of self-discovery and this journey of healing and honoring yourself through what is trauma to all of us around the world, especially us Americans, where we experienced trauma on 9/11 period. No matter where we were, what we were doing, how old we were, that was a traumatic event. And trauma brings upon triggers in our body that takes time to heal. It takes time to heal, and it takes intention to overcome and get to where what sounds like you are, where you literally physically felt it leave your body and hope restored.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I look back historically, and April of 1995 was a really important time as well. It was when the federal building in Oklahoma City was blown up, but I was living in Germany, and so those two times in our life and our history, April of 1995 and then 9/11, were really different because I learned about that while I was in Germany on the radio. And then I read a Newsweek magazine. So it was a different time then. The internet wasn't around and cable television wasn't available to me, at least for American news. But I remember being in this library in Germany, reading about this and being profoundly sad. But I think the difference on 9/11 was just seeing the imagery over and over and over again, and trying to understand this. And I think to now, with young people who are bombarded constantly with social media on all of the tragedies around the world and how are they coping with it, and to your point is like, we get to choose and decide how we respond to this. And but if we know that, if we've been taught that, and I don't think that everybody has been, and I think that this is one thing that I really want my audience to understand when I'm speaking or being on a podcast like this or through my own podcast, is I hope that they can start to learn how to create this capability within themselves to deal and cope with these very difficult things that we're all going to have to go through.
Let's dive into there, because I do believe exactly what you're saying is that oftentimes when we're in those moments of, or that period in all of our journey where there's darkness, where there is darkness, there's a lot of pain, suffering, sorrow, and grief. It sounds like you went through that, but on the other side, you came out knowing a little bit more and seeing the world differently after that. But let's dive a little bit into that, and kind of, if you were to look back, what are those tools, the approaches you had to take yourself through the darkness? You mentioned the openness for risk and being intentional about it. Tell us more in regards to looking back, what are those life skills you could share with us that took you through that journey, not only took you through that journey, but took you to the other side?
There are a few things that come to mind. First is I have a couple really incredible mentors who have helped me develop professionally, but also personally. And I wouldn't be where I am today without them. And while I struggled 20 years ago or so, one of my mentors was there for me whenever I needed. And it could be a phone call, it could be an in-person meeting, it could be a dinner, whatever. He was there, and he's still a close friend of mine today. And there have been times when I've been able to help him. Remarkably, he's about 17 years older than I am. So we have this close friendship, and we don't get through these difficult times alone, or I wouldn't have been able to. I can only speak for myself. Maybe there are some people who can rise to these challenges by themselves, but for me, it was really, really important to have these types of relationships. The second tool is empathy. I built a capability to empathize with people and seeing each other as human. That has been so important to me, for me as a father, for me as a community member, but also for me running this new company, 12 Geniuses, empathizing and trying to understand who we are and what motivates us has been a really important skill that I've developed over this time. Adaptability and willingness to change. I didn't think fatherhood was in the cards for me. And as I grew and changed, it's now the best part of my life, without a doubt. And you would think that I would be adaptable and willing to change, moving across continents and selling all of my possessions and just going on this big exploration. But, I just have continued to be willing to change and explore. And so that's been important. And then I think probably one of the more important things is, and it's a theme in a lot of what I do for speaking and for podcasting, is just an understanding that the world is better than ever, and it will continue to get better. And it's not linear. Sometimes there are tragic events that happen, but that's probably been the most important coping mechanism for me, is just understanding how much better the world is, how much freer people are, how many more opportunities there are. If you're a marginalized group, you very, very likely have more opportunities today than you did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. And that's very, very exciting. And so that helps me get through some of the more difficult challenges that we've talked about already.
Ooh, okay. This was very, very profound. So I'm going to reiterate some of this, because one, mentors. I'm going to use personal board of directors. I've spoken to many leaders on that as we go through this life journey, it is about having that personal board of directors, people that will not only be there when times get tough and when it's hard, but they'll also tell us things we need to hear, not that we want to hear, but we need to hear. And that beautiful circle of a board of director around us is what carries us through not only our hard days, but our fun and joyful days. And it takes a community. Two, I heard empathy. And what I heard when you were sharing that is this incredible muscle that you have built to see, to be able to place yourself in other people's shoes, that knowing that there are always different perspectives to one event, and that you honor others, but you also hear and understand that there are other perspectives. Adapting to change. Whoo, that's such a big deal now. And I've heard this, which is an incredible one. We have actually moved out of embracing change to embodying change. The need now that change is happening not only so rapidly, but so quick, not just so rapidly and quickly, but so profoundly in our lives. And the rapid and the profound effect of that means that we can't just sit here and hug it with an embrace. We have to be it every day. And that is that state of embodying the change. And boy, last but not least, last but not least is positivity, isn't it? That choosing, that is an intentional choice, that in every scenario and situation there is a positive lens we could look at that at. And if we choose that, it can keep us going towards the light versus getting stuck in the darkness. That's profound. That is profound.
Well, thank you. I think so too. And it has really changed my life, really understanding this. And there's a great book, and I'll just show it to you. Well, read it to the audience. Steven Pinker's Enlightenment Now. So this book has changed my life. And then Hans Rosling, he passed away a number of years ago, but his work as well, just helping people understand the progress that has been made. And I'll give you one example. In 1800, or around the turn of the 19th century, 90% of the world's population was living in abject poverty. 90% of 1 billion people. So that's 900 million people. Just 200 years ago, they were living in abject poverty. And now that percentage is less than 10%. So we've flipped it. And in fact, we had about 2 billion people living in abject poverty in the early 90s, and it's less than a billion. So it's around 600 or 700 million people living in abject poverty. So that gives you a sense for how the world has changed and how much better the world is, how much more opportunity there is. And that book that I showed you, it lays out dozens of different ways, different metrics for how the world has improved. The one area where it has not improved is the environment, but I believe that we're in a position with the technology that we have and the technology that we'll create to address climate change and to fix the climate so it is more sustainable. So I'm very, very optimistic and excited about the future.
I'm going to add one more here of what I'm hearing from what you just shared is you have a growth mindset, meaning searching for more information and historical facts has opened your not only eyes, but your heart in knowing the data. Because when we're in the dark, we are in the fight or flight mode and we get focused on the negative. And that's a normal brain neurological wiring that we have as human beings. So if we don't sit back and look for the facts intentionally, if we don't have these conversations with the people we are in community with that see things differently and that we're open to hearing them, or if we don't pick up some incredible books that you've shared with us, we're unable to get our focus off of the doom and gloom we may feel in our individual worlds that we're operating under because we are in the fight or flight mode.
Yeah, I had a moment not too long ago, actually, at the beginning of this year. It was right around the time that ChatGPT was coming out and people were using it. And I do have a growth mindset, no doubt about it. But I am not immune to being afraid. And I just typically, when I hear something that is going to fundamentally change the world, like I think AI is and will, and ChatGPT has the potential to do, I will sit on it and just kind of wallow in this fear. And I remember being at the gym, I was all alone. I was in kind of this yoga room or where there was mirrors and whatnot, and I just laid on the floor and I thought about, oh my gosh, this is going to change everything, and it's going to be bad for so many people. And I laid there for probably 5 minutes and I thought, no, I kind of rationalized it. I'm like, no, this is just a tool. It's like the smartphone, and it really is going to be dependent on how people use it. And I was like, okay, I'm better now. So it was just like, but I needed a few minutes to just like doom and gloom it. And then I just overrode it and switched to this growth mindset that you talked about.
Well, man, in order for us to shift from the parasympathetic to the sympathetic nervous system, to go either way out of the fight or flight mode, it takes 30 minutes and intention. So you basically shared a life experience where you worked on processing the information entering into fear mode, which is completely normal and human. So we do have to acknowledge that the fight or flight mode is not bad. It does what it was created to do, what it was created to do, which is, oh, there's an alarm. And rightfully so, right? So that protects us. But you intentionally went and laid down in a yoga studio and you processed your thoughts, your emotions, and you allowed the body to sink back into the grounded mode of seeing it the way you choose to see it, which is, no, this actually might be so bad, right? So you intentionally shift yourself into the parasympathetic nervous system to say, no, not so bad at all, and that it's okay. That's pretty profound. Wow.
It is, and I didn't always have that capability, but I have that capability now, and I'm grateful for that.
Yes, yes, what a journey. You touched on 12 geniuses. You touched on 12 geniuses, Don, and an incredible podcast that allows us to explore the great minds of great leaders, including Ken Blanchard and Chester Elton and a whole roster of incredible people out there moving and shaking the world for good. What led you to not only setting up this platform, but what also sounds like devoting your work purpose to this offering?
I sold the company in 2016. This is the company I'd been working on for 17 years, and I had a couple business partners, and I was approaching 50 at that point. And we knew we had a couple of years to work for the acquiring company. So I had this idea in my mind of what I might want to do, how I might want to reinvent myself. And it was really kind of at that time, 2016, where I poked my head up, we sold the company, and I was like, oh, wow, the world has really changed. When we started the company, social media wasn't really a thing. It was just starting, but it was really kind of clunky. And then mobile technology was not a thing. And then there were all these social changes that were going on around us, and we were becoming more polarized. And so I really wanted to explore these changes. And around that time, I started to think, well, if people don't adapt, if people aren't aware of these changes, and if there aren't leaders who are prepared to help their people adapt or change through these trends, societally, we're going to have some big problems. And so I wanted to not only explore these topics for myself and for the audience, but I wanted to create a platform and a place where people could learn as leaders what these changes are, how they might affect people, and hopefully inspire them to prepare their people for these changes. And I always say 3 years in advance. So if you know that there's going to be a big fundamental change in your industry, for your team, or for one of your members of your team, prepare them 3 years in advance, not 3 months in advance, because in 3 months in advance, all you can give them is a severance check and a good luck. But if you start thinking out more into the future, and so I'll give you a couple of examples that, I was just talking to futurists yesterday, two of them I interviewed for the podcast. We started talking about space tourism. Without a doubt, space tourism will be a thing. It will be a thing maybe in 20 years, maybe in 30 years, maybe in 50 years. That's amazing. And you might think, well, no, that's not possible. It absolutely is possible. So that's one of these big fundamental changes, or changes in energy with fusion potentially. That could be, nuclear fusion could be a game changer in how we power the planet. Sustainable fusion energy. So these are some of the changes that we talk about, and if you're really paying attention as a leader, you can start to see where the puck is moving, to use a Canadian sports reference. And then make sure that your people are skating to where the puck is going to go, as opposed to where it is right now. That's what I really wanted to do with this platform. And I'm blown away by what we've achieved in terms of a global audience and some of the people who've decided to come on the show. I couldn't have expected this when we started it back in 2000.
I heard you say earlier that a part of your reflection through the earlier stages of your journey was, man, we aren't taught these things. We, the next generation or us, we're not taught to look forward or prepare for the future in your initial experiences of life. And here you are now taking that observation, that life experience, and putting out there into the world on a global scale. Hey, let's think about 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, because the more, like you're saying, we can see what's on the horizon, the better prepared we are, the more mindful and thoughtful we can approach these changes versus, right? It's back to versus the respond versus react. And the only way to do that is to think about it, reflect on it, discuss it, talk about it, and that best prepares us to respond versus react.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think a really important thing for people to understand is, what are we expecting out of life? And if our expectations are to do what we've always done, we're going to be really, really disappointed.
Yeah.
But if we are willing to adapt and willing to change and willing to understand these changes, then we can thrive. Thriving is absolutely possible for us. And I'll give you a couple of examples, just because these are the things that spin around in my mind. In 1919, we had the first transatlantic flight. It was two men. They flew from St. John's, Newfoundland to Ireland, 1,880 miles, and it took them around 16 hours. Mm-hmm. In 2019, we had 36 million passenger seats make the trip across the Atlantic, over 100,000 flights. Yeah. So that's just a 100-year period. And that 100-year period, it wasn't moving nearly as quickly as the next 100-year period is. And so we may see this type of change in 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. Another guest on my podcast, we chatted about life extension. And I said to him, Sergey, I believe that if I make it to 70, I'm going to make it to 120 without a problem. And he said, you're right. You're right. And so I bring it back to expectations, because if you think you're just going to put in your 30 or 40 and retire, no, that's not possible. We have to prepare for a 60-year career, an 80-year career, because we may live to 120, 150, maybe even 200. That's not outside the realm of possibility. Yeah. And so we have to keep these things in mind. And so what does that mean? Well, that means choose a career that you absolutely love, and then be a continuous learner from the day you start that career until you have to make a shift to the next field or the next company or whatever it's going to be. Think in terms of learning, your learning journey not being 4 years of college, but 60 years of adulthood. These are the things that I think about. And that's what I mean by challenging our expectations and shifting our expectations. And I truly believe that, particularly among young people, they have super, super high expectations for what life can provide them and low hope. And that's a really bad combination. The expectations are because of what they're seeing on social media, and the hope has to deal with climate. And I'm here to say they should have high hopes, because we will address climate. We will address this existential issue that we are facing now, and we can achieve great things in our lives. We should expect great things in our lives, but we have to have high hopes and high expectations. You can't just have high expectations and low hope, because that is a formula for being very, very unhappy and miserable. Yeah.
Disappointment. It's disappointment. I also want to call out fear gets triggered by uncertainty and change. And so pair that with, we're at a time of such incredible change, rapid change, that within this lifetime, there's going to be the space travel, right? There is space travel, but space tourism, you just took me there. And immediately what happens in the human body is fear sets in because it's unknown, it's uncertain, and it's change. So that acknowledgement that fear is a part of this human experience, but how do we more quickly process it so we can move into processing the change that is right at our front door? Right at our front door.
Well, I have a few ideas on that. Obviously, I think of one thing you want to start with is knowing less. And people, when I say that, people are like, what do you mean know less? I think knowing more is better. No, I mean untether your beliefs from your identity and something that you may be certain of, but you know you're not certain of, wash that away. That is so important, is this idea of knowing less, and then you can be curious. So when you know less, you can be curious, and curiosity is so critical to exploring and flourishing in the future. Really start to talk to people who are different than you are, who may have different ideas than you are, and empathize with them. Don't judge them. And that's where I think we have exacerbated this fear, is through our divisions and demonizing the other side. No, the person with different political beliefs than you, they probably want a lot of what the same things that you do. They want their family to flourish. They want their kids to get educated. They want safety and security. You have that in common. Now, they may want to approach it a different way than you do, but at least let's focus on the commonality. And so knowing less and being curious, I think, are two really, really important things. And then the most important thing that I have learned as an adult is how to be happy. And I love to talk about this because there's a formula that we can follow. And if we understand what this formula is, then happiness can be at our fingertips. And the formula is very simple. If you draw a circle, you cut that circle in half. One half of the circle represents your genetic set point, and you're not changing that. For most of us, we're not going to change that, your genetic set point. So that kind of determines about half of your happiness. But the other half is divided into two slices. One is your circumstances, and the other is your intentional activity. And remarkably, your intentional activity is 4 times more powerful than your circumstances. So happiness truly is a state of mind, not a state of affairs. What are you going to do? Are you going to go to the gym, or are you going to sit on the couch and eat potato chips? Are you going to go out for coffee with a friend, or are you going to scroll through social media? Your intentional activity really can dictate whether or not you're happy. And so when I learned that, that was a game changer for me. And I was about 30, and I read Man's Search for Meaning. That was, that's where I kind of started to explore this topic. Viktor Frankl is a Holocaust survivor. He wrote, anything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, the freedom to choose one's own way. And he survived the Holocaust. So what's my excuse? I live in a beautiful home. I have access to incredible technology, friends, all of these different things. No, it's intentional activity. So, know less, be curious, learn to be happy, and treasure and cultivate relationships. You do those things, you'll survive all of this change, disruption, ambiguity, this VUCA world that we're in.
And the circle I want to call out is DNA, circumstances, all fall under the uncontrollable category.
Right.
Intentional perspective, in activity, choices, how we see things, positive or negative, how we act, go to the gym or eat a bag of potato chips, how we feel, which is right. Do we have hope and faith, or we don't? All are controllable. We can control those things. We have a choice. And I think my sense is that's why it ties to the data that says it's 4 times more powerful, right? Because we can control those things.
That's right.
We cannot control the circumstance. We cannot control our DNA. And therefore, focusing on those things keeps us in a rabbit hole of darkness because there's nothing we can do about those things. How we see it, how we feel, and how we act are our choice.
That's power.
Yeah.
That's real power. And when you learn that, when you learn how to harness that, you can survive just about anything in life.
You got it. Don, what would you say your purpose is today? If someone was to ask you, what is your life purpose, Don?
My purpose is to help people reach their full human potential. And that's evolved over the last 30 years. But a lot of it has been from that early mentorship and work that I did in the Hennepin County Juvenile Detention Center.
Yeah.
Just helping these young people understand that there is hope. And they changed my life too. But everything that I do now is directed toward that, helping others reach their full potential. I'm involved in a drug and alcohol treatment facility in Colorado. I'm on the board, and addiction is a barrier to people reaching their potential. And so that's why I'm involved with that. Opportunity, as you know, isn't evenly distributed. And so that's why I work with a lot of marginalized youth to help them develop leadership capabilities and an understanding for what the future can bring for them. And that's why I started 12 Geniuses, and it's what I'm trying to instill in my children as well.
Community of purpose, community of fulfilling our fullest potential. I love it. It sounds like you love it too. I don't want to, I think we could talk for the rest of the day, year here, but I don't want to leave without asking you to share with our listeners how they can find you. And I will be dropping your link into the notes of our time here, but please do share with our listeners where and how they can find you.
Thanks for asking that. They can find me at 12geniuses.com. And most of my social media is on LinkedIn. You can look for Don MacPherson, that's MacPherson, and search for 12 Geniuses as well on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. Don, thank you so much. I'm just excited to not only be on this journey with you, but to hear and be inspired by it as well. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.